absolutely no confidence in your government to do anything meaningful to deal with the biggest challenge facing humanity currently, and that is climate change. And why do I say that? Because yesterday, Taoiseach, once more, your minister and the chairperson of the Climate and Action Committee held hostage yet again to a bill that was overwhelmingly supported in this House as long ago as last February. The Climate Emergency Measures Bill sets out to ban the further issuing of fossil fuel exploration licences off our shores. And the reason it does that is because the science has long settled on the understanding that we must, as people who inhabit the planet, leave 80% of what is known proven reserves of fossil fuel in the ground. And there is a widespread movement out there screaming at governments globally to leave it in the ground. We have seen the evidence of that with young people outside the gates bailing at you on a weekly basis to do something meaningful about climate change. We are about to see a global strike of school children on the 15th of March. And to quote one very inspiring young school student from Sweden, Greta Thurnberg, she would say to you, "I want you to panic. I want you to feel the fear that young people feel every day of our lives when we wake up." And she says that because we are stealing the future of young people unless we challenge the fossil fuel industry. What this bill would do would help to contribute to a global movement. This isn't just about Ireland, it's a global movement, and there's no fool in nature. Nature understands that we are overheating this planet and that we are hurtling towards a global temperature rise of 2 degrees Celsius. And that's why this bill is taking radical measures to deal with that, and that is why this House overwhelmingly supported it, moved it to second stage. Now, in an act of incredible hypocrisy, there is procedural trickery taking place at the Climate Inaction Committee. Procedural trickery that means that the Minister, Mr Canny, and the chairperson vote to hold on to that bill as if it was their little baby, keep it hostage and don't allow it to move forward, when they already voted for a motion I put yesterday to lay a report before this House and allow the bill proceed to select committee, and then everybody can come in and amend it and change it. But it would be about doing something meaningful, something courageous, something even trailblazing, when you yourself, Taoiseach, accuse us of being laggards when it comes to climate change. Why not use your power now? Why not instruct your minister and the chairperson to let the bill go, release it and become a leader in climate change instead of a laggard?
Thanks very much, Deputy. I believe our duty as a government and our duty as politicians is to make sure that we pass on our planet to our children, to our grandchildren, in a better place than we found it. And that means taking climate action, it means protecting the environment. And we've taken a lot of action in recent years. For example, legislation working its way through the House at the moment to outlaw the use of microbeads and certain plastics. Legislation that we passed last year to prevent the government and government investment funds from investing in the hydrocarbon industry. Measures we've taken, for example, to support renewable energy, to take coal off the grid by the end of the decade, to take peat off the grid as well. Other actions as well, for example, that are underway from this summer. The fact that no new buses bought by Dublin Bus or Bus Air in our cities will be anything other than low-emission or no-emission vehicles. So we're taking climate action, both as an Oireachtas and as a government. But on this particular issue, I think you've got it wrong, Deputy. I think you've got it wrong in terms of climate action. I think you've got it wrong in terms of energy security. And I think you've got it wrong economically. Because the truth is that we will need natural gas and we will need oil for the foreseeable future as a transition fuel, whether it is to fuel aircraft so aircraft can fly, whether it is to produce plastics that are necessary as medical devices, whether it is to power our towns and cities and our industries when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining. And most people who are interested in climate science understand that natural gas is a transitional fuel and that we will need natural gas as part of our energy mix for the foreseeable future, if not for decades to come. So the question, therefore, is if we have our own natural gas, should we use it or should we import it instead? And of course, importing it as opposed to using our own is worse for the environment because gas that we may import from the United States is very often shale gas, which is much more damaging to the environment than our own natural gas from Carib, for example, or gas that we import from Russia or from Eastern Europe. Some of that gets lost along the way. So it's actually worse for the environment to import gas from America or Russia or Venezuela rather than to use our own gas. So from a climate science point of view, your proposal is wrong-headed in my view. Secondly, there's the whole issue of energy security. Do we want to use our own gas if we had it, or would we prefer to import it from Canada and the United States and Venezuela and Russia and the Middle East? Perhaps you would like that, but my view is that's wrong-headed. If we have our own natural gas, we should use it. We shouldn't be dependent on Russia and countries in the Middle East and Venezuela for our energy needs. And thirdly is the whole issue of imports and exports. Surely it makes more sense that we use our money, our taxpayers' money and our people's money on things like public services, for example, rather than importing oil and gas from other countries.
Deputy Smith.
Well, Taoiseach, I would dearly love to have this debate with your party and with every other elected TD in this Dáil, which is why I want you to tell your ministers to let go of that bill and let it go to Select Committee, where we can have precisely the type of debate you're trying to engage with me here. That is not what I asked you. I'm asking you, why is there procedural trickery being conducted by the minister and by the chairperson in order to hold that bill in limbo when you have no justification for it, even in your own standing orders, even in no precedence for us in this House ever in Dáil to do such a piece of administrative trickery with a bill that should proceed. And the reason I think you're doing it is because you are wed to the fossil fuel industry. Last February, after the bill passed second stage, the CEO of Providence Resources, Tony O'Reilly Jr., wrote to your then minister and said he was deeply concerned and wanted you to deal urgently with the question of this bill. You are wedded to the fossil fuel industry. You're dancing to their merry tune, but not to the tune of the young people who will go on strike on the 15th of March and who will be outside this gate consistently to demand that something meaningful happen. I'll ask you again, will you tell your minister to get that bill out of limbo and to stop breaking your own standing orders, to follow the procedures correctly and legally as they should be followed, and to allow it go to Select Committee where we can have the debate you want to have here now?
Thank you very much. Taoiseach, to conclude, please.
I note the Deputy didn't actually address any of my substantive arguments, whether it was around the climate science, whether it was around... I note the Deputy didn't answer any of my substantive arguments, whether it was around the climate science, whether it was around import substitution, or whether it was around energy security. Her question was an entirely procedural question, and as a Deputy should be well aware, the procedures of a committee. The procedures of a committee are a matter for the committee. If she's a question for the chairperson of the committee, the question should be addressed to the chairperson of the committee, surely, and that's where.
Deputy, please. Can you desist from heckling, please? Please. Taoiseach, have you concluded?
Say to the Deputy, is maybe to try to be constructive around the issue of climate change and climate action. I understand at the committee you offended the senators, which is one of the reasons as to why you've found it difficulty to get support for your bill, because you don't really want it passed. As is always the case, Ken Corla, the far left don't actually want to solve any problems. They want to politicise problems so that they can get airtime and attention and likes and retweets and all the rest of it. What I'd advise the Deputy to do, is to work harder, be respectful and polite to colleagues, try and build support for her bill, try and build a coalition before it, and to work much harder at the Climate Change Committee, for example, around the whole issue of carbon tax. But the truth is the far left have no interest in climate change. They just want to do this stuff anyway.
Deputy, you've had your time. Please. That concludes Leader's question. Concludes